everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we have a wonderful presentation by highly esteemed astrologer Carol Tebbs titled As Above, So Below, Echoes Throughout Sacred Literature. And lastly, if you wish to view our current class, workshop and webinar offerings, please visit KeplerCollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video. And I will say, Carol, as I said before the recording, this slide here doesn't do justice to all of the work Carol's done in her career. So if you would like to check out our YouTube channel, we have a Leaders in Astrology episode with Carol as she goes through over 50 years of astrological history. So introducing Carol is a career teacher with 40 years in advanced placement literature and a College Board advanced placement reader with another 20 years teaching at Kepler College. She has served the astrological community since 1971 as UAC co-founder, board chair, director, and UAC 95 coordinator. Carol has served 3 terms as ESAR's president, 10 terms as ESAR's board member, and as an ESAR CAP certified astrologer. Her Kepler College years began in 2003 as president, and that was 2003 to 2006. Carol currently serves on the Administrative Council and is an instructor for courses in the Fundamentals and Movement certificates, as well as speciality electives on rectification and astrology in sacred literature. Carol is the author of the complete book of chart rectification. I highly recommend that book, and it's available in digital format in the Kepler College store and also as an ebook. Also the author of Beyond Basics, Moving the Chart in Time, and Beyond Basics, Tools for the Consulting Astrologer. So Carol, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and I'm going to pass on the baton to you.
Thank you, Callum. Do you want me to take the screen?
Yes, please.
I want to cover a wider range than just astrology in sacred literature. I want to talk also about the cultural transmission through history that really impacts sacred literature. So I'm going to go both of those themes. But what we have coming up in May, in just a few days, the H106 class starts. And that class, the 5-week class, covers Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and indeed the sacred literature of those religions. And indeed, all of them acknowledge in some way or another the planets in the sky as in their own way of saying it, and the effect on life on Earth. The other class that is related to the same sacred literature is the ancient times with the Hinduism, the Buddhism, the Confucianism, so dealing with China and the East. So the 2 courses kind of go together, but I'm starting with the one that is more popular for the people in the Western Hemisphere. We blend cultures still today. Trade is worldwide. I mean, I go to the grocery store and I can get raspberries when I have 4 feet of snow on the ground because they come from someplace else in the world where it's the right season for that. So we have the international trade and travel, and that occurred in ancient times as well. But not only food and other necessities get transmitted, but the culture, the ideas of the other cultures, they blend. And so through the stories of origin, you find a lot of that in sacred literature. In mythology, heroes and the mythology and the stories that are kind of fantastic, but really it is telling the story of that culture and indeed the sacred literature of that culture. And basically it's all built around human themes, people facing great challenges, or the sins of man, or God's punishment for people who don't treat people with decency and fairness. Sibling rivalry is another main theme in the sacred literature of most all cultures. And certainly the good rewards for being a good person and virtuous. And nicest of all is the power of love. It's in every sacred literature piece that any culture has produced. So this world has stories to tell us and to learn. And it's a good way to learn about each other, even in these current times. Even if you don't travel to all of the countries in the world, by reading their sacred literature and indeed their mythology, you can tell a lot about their values. So as above, so below. I think that was about clearly 900 of the Common Era. And I noticed that Nick Campion is having his conference coming up this summer, titled As Above, So Below, with a subtitle to it. But Hermes Trismegistus created this phrase that caught on, and certainly all of the astrologers from the earliest times understood that the planets in the sky, the lights, the sun and the moon, the stars in the sky, had some message to give to the people on Earth. I mean, that's how the ancients even started farming, looking at the phases of the moon. When's a good time to plant? When's a good time to reap? And so really, the sacred literature connects to the sky, and astrology is part of that story. And Durkheim even says there's no religion that is not both cosmology and a speculation about the divine. So we do have throughout all of the ancient literature and the sacred literature up to today, even making connections with the sky. Now I'm starting with just a couple of slides on the ancient, because I want to get into the cultural transmission that just will amaze you, as well as the astrological references. So clearly the beginnings of astrology occurred not in the West. It was in the Near East and the East. India was had been using astrology way before most of Europe or America or any of those of us in the West, even well before Christianity. Now, the Vedas, the early sacred works of Hinduism, all of the information there you can find references to planets or to constellations in the sky. They may not have called it astrology then, but they were making connections between the cosmos and has the relationship to men and people on Earth. And indeed, in Buddhism, the Wheel of Life, the I Ching, it's still used in China. So there are a lot of literature that gives us information. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Persia and Zoroastrianism. And that's Persia, which is now Iran. But that's getting into the Near East there and getting close to where the Western religions were created, Judaism and so forth. So let's take a quick look. I'm going to spend more time on some slides and more quickly on a few others. But in these ancient Indian sacred texts, the Mahabharata is a huge book, 912 pages. I mean, you're not going to read that in a day or two. But here you're talking about hundreds of years BC. And indeed, here's the very famous, beautiful poem, the Bhagavad Gita, which is within that 912 pages. And so the whole thing talks about a family through the ages and their spats and their disagreements and it's a normal family. And most of us know within our families of the large collective, there's some people who don't agree with the others and so forth. And sometimes it breaks out in rivalry. And so in the case of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a war. And again, the interesting thing of it, one of the brothers asked for Krishna's help, which to them was the equivalent of God's help. And the other one asked for soldiers. Just give me soldiers. I don't need God. So you can see the spiritual part as well. Here is one of the visuals that they display for the Wheel of Life. Gosh, looks kind of like a chart. But here is a description of the world from not only the earth. Let's start with the human world, hungry ghosts, and notice hell is below, but at the top is heaven. And indeed, the gods and so forth. In ancient times, the gods were related to planets. So there was that connection. And indeed, as we get into the actual literature, I can point out specific phrases that make that connection. But clearly, the intent was to make the connection of humans' world and the fears and the hopes that they have within their lives and their behavior for doing good works versus lying and cheating and doing bad works. And here in the sky, the Buddhists accepted that there's a gigantic cosmic energy that gave birth to the stars and the planets, and indeed all living things. But they didn't directly speak of astrology. They moved away from that subject because they thought it hindered their spiritual process. However, there's still the connection to what's in the sky, the celestial sphere, the planets, and they are mentioned in that sacred literature. They didn't call it astrology at that time, but basically, you're making calendars, you're making plans for planting your crops, and you're looking at the sky for that information. And indeed, for travel from one country or one area of the globe, let's say from China across the wide range clear into Turkey and on into Europe and everything, they use the sky as their compass. They followed the stars, the planets that they could follow. And indeed, those references show up in literature, the sacred literature. Now, as astrologers, we spot that right off. We go, yeah, it's there. The average reader, the word astrology isn't used until, the after Ptolemy. But that said, Buddhism didn't condemn astrology, but through the teachings, we don't need astrology to achieve spiritual enlightenment. So there's plus and minuses in terms of forecasting. Giving strength to the stars in the sky and the planets, and giving them names of the gods and so forth in ancient times, that was fine. But forecasting was what they were suspicious of. Now, in Chinese astrology, it is one of the most ancient arts of the Chinese and the most important form of Chinese divination. And thousands of years ago, the astronomy and the astrology were one and the same. Astronomers observed the stars to see what heaven was planning for Earth and humanity. And indeed, the astronomers were officials in the imperial court in China. And they were talking 3,000 years ago. And indeed, it's an unbroken line. And so even still, some of the most important astronomical records that we have are from China, ancient. So clearly, even today, Chinese astrology is alive and well, and they often consult the almanac, the Zhongchu, for auspicious and unlucky days. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time on the Zoroastrian, the Persian sky earth, because now we're into the Near East. Iran is now the name of what used to be Persia and the big Persian Empire. But that goes back for 2,000 years BC. And the religion of Persia at that time was Zoroastrianism. And indeed, it was Persian Empire was at its peak around the 6th century BCE. This is before Christianity had been, Jesus hadn't been born yet. Judaism was growing at that time as well. But according to later Zoroastrian legend, a lot of the ancient texts got lost. Indeed, when Alexander the Great swooped in from Europe and destroyed the royal library, a lot of that information was gone. And so Zoroastrianism, with its Hellenistic beliefs, still continued, but look at what has happened. I'm going to be talking now about the influence on the religion of Judaism, of Christianity, as well as Islam. And those are the sacred literature pieces that we're going to address in the May 6th class that starts fairly soon. And so here, Zoroastrianism was very clear about the motion of the planets as astral bodies and the connection to the seasons and the pattern of daily nomadic life, traveling and looking at sunrise, sunset to figure, their position. It's a map. The sky was their map. So the Avesta was their sacred literature there. And indeed, the Avesta of the Zoroastrians was very focused on water, earth, fire, and air. And indeed, as astrologers, we go, yeah, we know what that is. Don't we, Callum? And so clearly, modern scholars are saying it's the first ecological religion, but nonetheless, carrying it forward into the Renaissance period, here you have Raphael, wonderful artist of the Renaissance period. And the name of this picture that you can see is Zoroaster holds the celestial sphere in Raphael's school of Athens. So if you look here, let me move me there. Here is Zoroaster holding the celestial sphere. Over here is the woman holding the earth. And look what they're doing down on the floor there. They're creating an astrological chart. So astrology certainly had carried its way in. And indeed, now this Raphael created this picture in 1509. In the 1400s, I think you'd probably call that the Dark Ages, and 1509 probably still isn't quite into the Renaissance. But in the late 1300s, you had the Divine Comedy, the Dante. Now, certainly that's not a sacred literature, but it's a very popular literature. And again, it was Dante himself as the main character having a crisis in his life and metaphorically goes through all of the levels of hell that he created. And indeed, he enjoyed life. He was a very devout Christian, but he enjoyed life. And the astrology was very, very popular at that time. And indeed, apparently, he must have got a reading that he didn't like so much, because he placed the astrologers in the 8th level of hell. But nonetheless, in just 150 years later, here you have Raphael carrying on the story of Zoroaster. Now, the anti-religious cult astrology is the best and maybe the last hope of religion. Now, this is coming from Dennis Elwell, a famous astrologer. And he says, because it offers a meeting ground for the scientific and religious views of reality, where people can reconcile their many differences. And so this class of the Western sacred literature explores cultural transmission, the Persian, the Babylonian religious views, and the cosmic views that influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Here we are in early Jewish culture. Gosh, I think all of you can look at that and say, indeed, somebody was doing astrology. Of the 6 very early synagogues that have been excavated, the Jewish synagogues, all of them had a zodiac on the floor. And so this example is from Hamat Tevera on the Sea of Galilee. That's Jesus's territory. But this is well before Jesus's arrival. So astrology had been around. carried from across Asia through Persia. And indeed, here we have in the Sefer Hazim, the earliest horoscope was divided into 8 houses. And you can see the Book of Secret Mysteries, the Sefer HaRazim, dates from the 3rd century before Christ, BCE. I think this one is from the Common Era, but the previous slide on the floor was BCE. And indeed, this is the time of Noah, King Solomon. So astrology was there, not just stars and constellations in the sky, but actual charts. And indeed, the Sefer HaRazim basically was written to preserve knowledge of the Jewish and Hellenistic magic incantations and the astrology of the time. But it goes further than that. Now, in the Bible, and again, once we get in the class, I have a lot more information than I have today for you. But Isaiah and the astrologers, Isaiah had some second thoughts. Astrologers were sometimes called wise, but the prophets, the Bible's prophets from the Torah, or the Old Testament, as some of the Christian people would call it, the prophets caution against the astrologers. Even Isaiah says this, and here's a picture of, from the book, pointing to the stars, that thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Basically, what they're saying is, we're not so much against looking at the stars and making relationships to metaphor what's happening on the earth, but the prognosticators, the forecasting, is what they've been, that's on God's territory. We got to stay out of that. So there was always pushback against astrology, but it was still there. It was still done. And it's echoed through the sacred literature. So here's Isaiah saying, the astrologers, behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. So obviously, in the sacred literature, there is some pushback against astrology. Okay, it's still there, though. And of course, the astrology community and indeed the astronomers have had some different opinions on this. But basically, the wise men were coming from Persia, and because they saw a big star in the sky. And, some scholars say it was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Others think it's a nova in the sky that is a bright, splash of light that stays for a few days and then dies out. But it's an astronomical event that indeed, this is big time in the New Testament, sacred literature. So that said, here's one I want to talk about: cultural transmission. Most of us have not read the 21st century BCE. So you're talking about over 4,000 years ago. It's not on anybody's reading list. However, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that long ago, it's Sumerian. It's the oldest known recorded text in human history. And you will be amazed how much it influenced the Bible's creation story. Just listen to this. And Kindu, created from the earth by God, lived among the animals in a natural paradise until he is tempted by a woman, Shamat. Anything sound familiar? He accepts food from her and is forced to leave his shelter, aware of his nakedness. And Kindu encounters a snake that steals immortality from him. Have we heard that story before? Persian, again, in the 10th century BCE. In the Persian scriptures of the Zoroastrians, the Avesta, tells the story of Ormuzd creating the world in the first 2 humans in 6 days. Then he rested on the 7th. The names of the 2 human beings were Adama and Eva. Wait a minute. When was the Bible written? The Bible story of the Garden of Eden was written in the 9th century BCE. And indeed, the origin of it goes back to the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh. At this point, well over 4,000 years ago. Even using the same names. And so in the Avesta, of the Persian Avesta, you have this whole story told, and you say, wow. Back to over 4,000 years ago, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Utnapishtim is warned of an imminent flood by God and is instructed to build a large boat in order to survive. Now, the Jewish portion, the Torah, wasn't even created 4,000 years BCE. But in this boat, the dimensions of the boat are 120 cubits. The building materials are wood, pitch, and reeds, and there are 6 decks. Well, the story goes on. In the same Epic of Gilgamesh, after the flood, the boat lands on a mountaintop where Utnapishtim sends out a series of birds to find dry land. Now, as growing up, and I went to church with my family and read the Bible, I mean, I knew that story in the Bible. I'd say, wait a minute. This was written at least 2,000 years before the Bible. So he eventually sets all the people and animals free and sacrifices to the God that saved him. So we thought these details were from Genesis in the Bible. But the story was derived from the Epic of Gilgamesh at 21,000 BCE. You go, so the cultural transmission impacts the sacred literature. And so I want to stop sharing and now we can talk about some of those things. There's a lot more in the class. I didn't want to go through absolutely everything, but Callum, did you have any surprises?
I'd love your presentations. I will say, if anyone joins any classes, Carol's one of my favorite teachers of all time. And absolutely taught me so much through the years. So thank you so much for a wonderfully insightful presentation.
Yeah, but there's so much there in the sacred literature that that we love and learn from. But But it's not just, you can't just say, oh, well, I'm Christian and this is what I believe. You have roots through all cultures around the world that are through the travel and that cultural transmission happens, and it comes into the sacred literature. And indeed, the astrology goes with it. Even in the popular literature, it's amazing how much is referred back to those ancient texts.
Absolutely wonderful. Would you like to start in the Q&A?
Yes, yeah, we have plenty of time.
Let's have a conversation. Wonderful. So if you want to pop your questions in the Q&A box.
Yeah, I could have gone longer with more slides and everything, but come to the class. You can see all of it, but you get the idea.
Sure. So some of the questions we've got here, in the timetable of cultures using astrology, where do the Greeks fit with their Hellenistic astrology and also those of Babylon? I think you've touched on that, but maybe more referring to the Greeks and the Hellenistic.
Yes. Well, the Persian Empire predated the Hellenistic times. And so Persia, or Iran now, had influence. If you look at a map, I should have, that's one of the slides I have in the course side. But if you look at a map, and indeed nowadays we're seeing that map every day because of the war going on in that area. And the closeness of Iran, which at that time was Persia, was dominant. But when Alexander the Great, from coming in from Greece, overran it and the Persian Empire fell. And so then's when the Hellenistic came in. But you're talking right around, where Egypt is, where, Gaza and all of that. Those places are still on the ancient map. The word Gaza was on the ancient map. It's still there. Israel was not on the map at that time, but Babylonia and over many millennia, there are many different wars and overtakes in that area. And so the Christianity derived out of Judaism. Judaism is more ancient than Christianity. But, the Persians influenced the Judaism, because you're talking, the area is, you're within 1,000 miles of each other. So it's pretty close area for cultural transmission. Yes, as Catherine is saying that the astrological calendar is part of, the Zoroastrians still around. But that name kind of, astrology got attached with Zoroastrianism.
Another question we've got here, which religions taught the 4 elements? And I think you touched on that before. So Buddhism primarily?
No, Zoroastrianism, particularly. Fire, air, earth, and water were major.
What's the Chinese? Is that 5?
They have 5.
You've got, is it metal and wood? Is that
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But the East certainly had an influence, and it was the trade routes, the Silk Road, taking the spices from India across, and they stop at places you can't fly like we do now. And so you visit and you interact with people along the way, and so that information got transmitted, and so absolutely, the Persians influenced the Judeans when Cyrus conquered the Babylonians. That's all history. But I'm just saying that's cultural transmission is part of what creates the sacred literature. you think they're all so separate and so different. No, they have so much in common. Yeah, Catherine, yes, the eternal flame. The Zoroastrians are still around. And indeed, there were periods of time that certain groups, the Zoroastrians, for instance, were thrown out, and they had to leave their homes. And gosh, it's kind of like what's happening now in that part of the world. You go, oh my heavens, this history's been gone around before, just different names.
Wonderful. I'll ask the recommended books for the last question. We've got another one here. Let's see. I last saw your presentation when you had an assistant. Let's get to the question. Sorry. You were speaking about the great aspects of all monotheist religions. So Christianity has the greatest light. Islam depends on the scriptures into life, like an assertive take to the spiritual realm. And I was wanting to remember what you said was one of the greatest highlights of Judaism. Sorry if I've not articulated that very well. I remember back to that one presentation 2 years ago, apparently, on this.
Rhonda, speak up. Just say what it is.
Let's see. Like an assertive take to the spiritual realm, as wanting to remember what you said was one of the greatest highlights of Judaism.
There's several. I have to.
You'd have to go back.
I'd have to remember it. Yes. No, it's a good question, and I'm sure.
Well, the other one kind of ties in here as well. Can you discuss the 8-house system used in ancient Jewish tradition? Do they use 12 zodiacal signs as the Egyptians?
That got the Egyptians were the first creators of that 8. But there were so many from the Hindu religion and the astrologers in India were using 12. And so 12 is, works. It divides in so much better ways than 8. Because you can have, 3s, 4 3s make 12. The 3 doesn't fit in 8 anywhere. In 8, you only get hard aspects, let's say. In 12, you can have hard aspects and soft aspects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for answering that. Could you please tell us more about the Gilgamesh and Noah story in terms of astrology, and if these are the same or not?
Well, Gilgamesh certainly is a story that is certainly the sky is referenced in Gilgamesh many times, the planets, as applying to what they were doing on Earth, of knowing, of following travel, following certain stars so that you'd know where you were headed, and to keep on track. I mean, that was how the map. There weren't any maps then. The sky was their map. And so astrology derived from that learning. And indeed, astrology and astronomy were one and the same up through the Renaissance. Then the Catholic Church got involved in even Kepler got in trouble because they were saying, oh no, the sun, we revolve around the sun. It's not all around of the earth. And so, and indeed, astrology was in the Renaissance. The astrology was in the universities. Even Harvard University in the United States has on the records a whole diploma for astrology. Now, nobody's teaching it there. That's kind of put away. We don't do that anymore.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't.
Yeah, astrology was in the universities all through Europe, and indeed in India, they're still in the universities. Astrology's in the universities. It's in the West where we're going, ooh, scarlet letter. No, we can't do that.
I hope that changes in the next few decades.
Well, we're working on it. We're working on it.
Absolutely. Really interesting question here. Wondering about the native religions or beliefs in Europe pre-Christian times, so i.e. the pagan religions, Judaism, any reference to the skies in that period?
Of course. In any sacred literature, whether it's a modern religion or an ancient religion, there's a reference to the skies. It was their map of and they always made references to it. Now, they didn't necessarily in ancient times call it astrology. But when you're looking at the sky and looking at star clusters or planets that, maybe they didn't have names for them then, but they knew that certain times of the year, you see that planet, that pink one there that's in the sky in the morning. Oh, then other times it's in the evening. They used the reference. They didn't call it astrology, but it was astrology. Now, were they doing personal charts? The only one that got a personal chart done was the king or the queen. The common person, even the wealthy common person, it was for helping the monarch decide when to go to war, if it was going to work out successfully. It's that practical kind of thing. Will the crops grow? I mean, that was the origin of astrology, and certainly the sacred literature incorporates that information.
This actually ties into a question we've got here. So someone's saying, I have understood astrology to be mainly related to agriculture and food growing and sailing with the stars and constellations used as a map.
That's how it started.
Yeah.
That's how it started, yes. And then the rulers, the monarchs, the kings, queens, whoever was in charge, they wanted forecasting. Well, are the crops going to come in this year? And that became very valuable for the monarch. And on all over the world, from China to India to, through the West and so forth. I don't have much sacred literature from Africa, but again, that's something that could be done in another class, but it's there throughout the world. All sacred literature has reference to the sky, particularly the ancients. Now, in modern times, we have so many tools that most of the time people don't look up the sky and pay attention. They should. Maybe there's smog in Los Angeles and you can't see the sky.
Well, the light pollution and how are you in Oklahoma? Can you go out the back door? And
yes, I live on the lake here, so yeah. But I'm just saying we've gotten, in the modern cultures around the world have gotten to the point where they don't need to look up and see what planets are there. And we use our computers and look at our software and we see those little glyphs. And so we go, yeah, I know where Venus is. Instead of seeing it in the sky. Because the visible planets are clear through Saturn. We can't see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And
so walk out the back door and have a look. Wonderful. Have you noticed any differences between mentions of astrology in the sacred literature during pre versus post Copernican turn in the astronomical theory?
Well, certainly God is above all of the planets in the sky. And, certainly all of the sacred literature puts at least all of the monotheistic religions and their sacred literature certainly put a God, whatever name they use for God, as above, beyond that stars and planet sphere. But nonetheless, in their stories, the references to the planets are there. It's now in some of the cultures, they accept astrology. It's the forecasting. It's the forecasting that they have problems with. And indeed, I will say this, that in 20th century astrology, so much of it was psychological, interpreting the natal chart, and the emphasis on forecasting was gone, really. You talk about the promise of the natal chart. And a lot of astrologers went only that far. They didn't go to forecasting. Well, you have Saturn now on your Venus, and so probably you need to be more practical and, do date night with your partner and, kind of do things properly. I'm just,
Sure.
Do
you have any comments on the astrology of karma and reincarnation, and maybe how does that tie into some of the...
That gets into the Indian sacred literature. And so I think you would get more of that in 107. But the Christianity and the Judaism are those sacred texts, and Islam doesn't go into karma and that type of thing. But certainly the Indian, the Hindu texts, you will find that information. And certainly in the sacred literature of modern times, possibly. But I don't get into the, there are religions that are much smaller that are around the world now that are not considered of the major ones. I haven't dealt with those yet.
Wonderful. And what are some books you would recommend for the class or just in general?
Well, for the class, Nick Campion, Astrology and Cosmology. Nick Campion, he has a couple of books on it that are academically supported. So in fact, that's one of the texts required. The other text that I ask students get is, let me see.
I'm looking as well. I've got a couple down here, but I don't know where they are.
But the other book has passages from the different religions of the sacred literature. So instead of having people buy the Avesta or the Jewish Torah or the different things, they can see passages of all of those religions in one book. I can see it right here.
Carol, I just popped in the chat box the books that you have listed on your course. So
oh, absolutely. There they are.
Yeah.
Perfect. You've got it. You've got it.
And Laurie, from the very active chat, did you see any other questions that maybe have not made it to the Q&A box?
There might have been one. Let me just look back up here for a moment. Why did the ancient Egyptians think that Sirius, the star Sirius, was so important?
But it's the brightest star in the sky. And it depends on where you live. And again, I can't remember exactly in Egypt, but I'm sure that it's the brightest star in the sky over Egypt. And even It's one of the first magnitude stars. I like Sirius. I have Sirius on my midheaven.
You're a bright star.
Yeah, but certainly your major stars are important in the sacred literature.
There's one here about Eastern course. Is that going to be about Vedic? I'm not sure about that question. Laurie, do you know more about
Well, Carol, whenever you said 107, is that your sacred literature for the Eastern?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the sacred literature of the Eastern. So it's going to have the Vedic, the sacred literature, as well as the Chinese and even I throw Japanese in there too. But particularly the strongest part is that all of that Asia cluster that moved to the West and took all of that understanding of their culture that got blended in with what was happening in the Near East. And indeed, it got into Greece and so forth. So there is a migration there of cultural transmission.
Wonderful. Serena says she's signing up, so wonderful.
I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat box. So if anyone's interested in that course, you can go read about it. You can use this link.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Carol, thank you so much for a wonderfully insightful presentation. Just to reiterate, we'll put the replay on our YouTube channel to check it out there and find out more about Carol. Again, one of my favorite teachers of all time, never mind just astrology, of everything I've ever done. So if you want to sign up, you're in wonderful hands with Carol.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming, and all around the world. We love our worldwide Kepler family, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Could I say something real quick before we jump off? There's a question, the date for Eastern, sacred literature Eastern in the summer is July 6th. And the one for Western is starting on the 11th. So that's this upcoming week. I think that's a Saturday. Yeah, it's a Saturday. So if you want to join, you can still get in there.
Yes, and the time is on Pacific time and 10 a.m. No, excuse me, it's 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific. So it's very culturally advantageous for the Europeans. The West Coast people go, oh, I don't want to get up for that. But they do, they come. And Nellie is in Malaysia, and I think it's about 2 o'clock in the morning for her. She's already registered.
Right on.
Dedication. I love it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Get out.
See you next time.
Yeah.